Welcome, everybody. I am specially recording this masterclass for all of those who could not attend, since on that particular day we had a house full and we could not enable more of you to connect on to the Zoom masterclass. So, before we begin, I want you to keep in mind one real team throughout the session. This team could be your department, one business unit, or perhaps the leadership team reporting to the CEO. Now, ask yourself a simple question. Are they genuinely producing the impact you expect from them? Because most organizations don't really have a strategy problem. They have a strategy to execution problem. Somewhere between deciding what matters and what people should be doing daily, something gets lost. Priorities become diluted, actions become disconnected, and accountability becomes inconsistent. Today, we are going to look at the entire chain from strategy to priorities to actions to accountability and finally results. And as we go along, I want you to identify the weakest link in the team that you have just selected. So let's see what leaders across the world have been talking about execution. Now, none of us needs convincing that execution is important. In fact, some of the most respected thinkers on leadership and strategy have been saying this for years. This slide cites Ram Charan, John Deere, Robin Sharma, and the four disciplines of execution, making essentially the same point. That is, ideas are valuable, but ideas by themselves don't create business outcomes. The challenge starts after the strategy has been decided. How do we get hundreds or thousands of people to consistently do the few things that move it forward? That is why execution isn't simply a management activity, it is truly a leadership capability. And yet, there's an uncomfortable contradiction sitting behind all this. So, what is it costing us? Because if there is merely another leadership concept, we can all nod and move on. But when execution breaks down, opportunities are delayed, effort gets wasted, and the targets start slipping. People work extremely hard, but too much energy goes into low impact activities. And eventually, that shows up in margins, engagement, risk, and business performance. This slide frames the potential execution loss as 20 to 30%. Whether your exact number is higher or lower, the question is still worth asking. If your organization is, say, 500 crore business, even a small execution gap can represent a very large number in terms of money. So instead of asking, what does an execution system cost? Perhaps we should be asking, what is doing nothing costing us? Now, let me give a simple test. Suppose I walk you into an organizational room, into your organization tomorrow and randomly ask 10 people, what are our top three priorities this year? How consistent would their answer be? Now, I've asked those same people, what three things did you personally do last week to move these priorities forward? I suspect the second question would produce a very different conversation. And that is the heart of execution gap. It is the distance between knowing what matters and then consistently doing what matters. The interesting part is that this gap usually doesn't appear in just one place. This picture makes the chain very simple. First, strategy has to become clear enough for people to understand what really matters. If that doesn't happen, we have a clarity gap. Next, people have to translate those very priorities into meaningful daily and weekly actions. If they don't, we have an action gap. Then these actions need consistent follow through, review, and ownership. That is the accountability gap. Good strategies, therefore, don't always fail because people are unwilling. They often fail because the connection between these stages are weak. And then this brings us to one of the strangest things about modern organizations. Your organization has systems for everything except execution. Look around most organizations today, and you will find that they have systems for finance, CRM, operation, HRMS, marketing systems are also available as also sales for measuring the pipeline. But here's the question I want you to think. What system tells you what people are doing this week to create next month results? So most systems are very good at telling us what has already happened. Execution needs something slightly different. It needs visibility into what is really happening now. And that distinction takes us to lead measures and lag measures. So, what are lag measures and lead measures? Think about your annual health checkup. Your cholesterol level is high, your blood pressure or body weight are largely lag measures. The results have already been created by what you have been doing last month and the previous month. And by the time you see these results, you can do nothing about it. You can't look at the report and go back 6 months to change your yesterday's behavior. But exercise, sleep, nutrition, stress management are lead measures. These are behaviors you can influence today, and they influence what the future report is likely to say. Now, business is actually exactly the same. Revenue and profit matters enormously, but by the time we review them, they are largely outcomes of earlier behavior. So leaders need to ask not only what results did we get, but also what are we doing now that will create the next results. Now, execution is actually not a monthly rhythm, right? It's a weekly and a daily operating rhythm. That is why execution cannot be something we visit only at the month end. By the time a problem shows up in the month's number, many opportunities to correct it have already gone. Execution has to become part of the weekly operating rhythm. What are the priorities this week? What actions are people taking? What is moving and what is stuck? What support or decision is required from leadership? The purpose is to influence the results while there's still time to influence it. So execution is not an event, it is a rhythm. Now, people plus processes plus system is what gives us execution. And that is where I want to make an important distinction. Technology as such does not execute strategy. It is people who do. But people without a simple process often depend too heavily on individual discipline. So we need people who understand what matters and take ownership for it. We need a process that converts priorities into simple, repeatable rhythm. And we need a system that makes execution visible so that we can track, learn, and improve quickly. Put those three together, and leadership gets something extremely valuable: visibility with accountability. Now, let me simplify that operating rhythm into 7 questions. In this slide, I've reduced execution excellence to 7 very practical leadership questions. The first being, are we aligned around the same goals? Are we focused on the few things that genuinely move those goals? And are we acting on them? Are people sharing what they learn instead of keeping good practices to themselves? Are commitments visible and reviewed with accountability? Are we learning from execution rather than simply reporting numbers? And when circumstances change, and they will, are we adapting quickly enough? Align, focus, act, collaborate, account, learn, and adapt. That is the rhythm we are going to explore today. So let's start with the execution question one, that is alignment. Notice I do not ask whether the CEO has communicated it. Communication is what leaders do. If that connection is weak, effort will be fragmented and people become very busy but in different directions. Alignment gives people a clear line of sight between what they do and what the organization is trying to achieve. One organization, one direction, and one connected set of priorities across the organization. Now let's look at the power of alignment. Here is what alignment looks like when it becomes systematic. Organization A started with 3 company goals, which cascaded into 50 departmental goals across 17 departments and then 86 team goals. So what we were able to create with this organization was 139 interconnected goals across the organization. In organization B, where we worked, again, there are 3 company goals, the top 3 company goals, which cascaded into 74 departmental goals and 163 team goals. That created 240 interconnected goals. The impressive part is not the number of goals, it is the connection between them. People could see how their teamwork contributed to success of the company. The line of sight is what turns a corporate strategy into meaningful ownership. Now let's go to focus. Alignment tells us where we are going, but now comes the next problem. There are too many things we could go to. Every team has strengths to build, weaknesses to correct, processes to improve, risks to manage, and opportunities to pursue. If everything becomes a priority, nothing really is. So we apply the 80-20 principle, Pareto principle, and ask which few areas will create the biggest impact. Then we go one step further and select perhaps three highest impact lead measures for each goal. This is where leadership becomes a discipline of choosing decision making rather than simply adding. Without focus, teams spread themselves thin and activity begins replacing impact. Execution isn't about doing more, it's about doing more of what really matters. The power of the focus. This slide shows what happens when focus compounds across the organization. Imagine three company goals translating into 74 departmental goals and 163 team goals. Now imagine every one of those goals identifying just three high impact areas. So within the organization, suddenly you have 711 strategic focus areas being reviewed rather than hundreds of random activities. In this particular case, where we worked, all three goals were surpassed in the first quarter one. 72 of the departmental and team goals were achieved or overachieved. Also, we recorded 192 lakhs in saving, 12 process improvements, and 7 innovations. Think of this like a difference between a floodlight and a laser beam. One spreads energy everywhere, the other concentrates it. When every team concentrates energy on the vital few, relatively small gains can compound into significant business results. Now let's come to action. Now we come to the point where strategy becomes real or remains a PowerPoint. Can we connect what people did last week directly to the strategic goals? We start with the goal, what must we achieve, then the focus area, what few levers are most likely to move that goal, and finally the high impact actions, what will somebody actually do this week? Because improve customer relationship is not an action, but meet these three customers by Friday is. Strategy becomes execution only when it enters someone's calendar. If it doesn't enter the calendar, it normally remains an intention and a wish. The tsunami effect of actions. I love this. One good action doesn't normally change an organization. In fact, most high impact daily actions look surprisingly small, but small actions repeated consistently create a momentum. These two organizations we worked with simultaneously showed 10,900, close to 11,000 actions in 90 days, focused on the three strategic goals. Organization A completed 5,858 Q1 actions, while Organization B completed 5,101 actions. Their completion rate also improved over the period. One wave looks insignificant, but thousands of aligned small waves or actions create enormous force. And this is a tsunami effect. Disciplined consistently turns small action into large business outcomes. Now let's go to shared learning, which is extremely important. Here, a question that organizations don't ask often enough. When one person discovers a better way of doing something, how quickly does this percolate down to everybody else? And how fast is it then learned and actioned upon? In many companies, a great practice remains trapped inside the individual who discovered it. Someone solves a problem, wins an account, or improves a process, and the rest of the organization never hears about. Shared learning means making those actions, insights, and wins visible quickly. Other people can then copy it, adapt, and improve. Recognition also matters because when useful behavior becomes visible, people are much more likely to repeat it. So, collaboration isn't simply people helping one another, it is a mechanism for spreading performance. Now, take this idea further. Isn't it true that some people in almost every team consistently get better results than others? And isn't it also true that some departments outperform very similar departments? That normally means somebody has discovered a better method, behavior, or approach. If we capture that learning and replicate it, individual excellence becomes team's learning. Team learning becomes departmental replication, and eventually the organization develops collective intelligence. The examples on this slide show lessons captured, practices replicated, and departments adopting shared practices within just 90 days. Think of this like a beehive. One bee creates very little. But when the intelligence of the hive comes from thousands of connections, you suddenly have a huge amount of honey being created. The next question is around accountability. Accountability often gets interpreted as putting pressure on people, but that is not what I mean here. Good accountability starts with visibility. First, what is on track, at risk, or off track? Second, what did we commit to and what actually got completed? Third, what is blocking this progress and what decisions are required? And finally, who's going to do what by when? This is essentially the agenda of a strong weekly execution meeting. The purpose of this meeting isn't just to admire or curse the scoreboard, it is to do actions to change the score. Question 6 is all around learning. Most review meetings concentrate heavily on one question: did we achieve the number? Of course, that matters, but it is only the first part of the conversation. We should also ask, what did we actually do compared with what we intended to do? Then ask, what worked, what didn't, and why? And finally, what will we change next month because of what we have learned? Every monthly retrospect ends only with numbers. And if that happens, we are just reporting. But if every monthly retrospect ends with lessons and changed actions, we are now truly learning. So review, reflect, learn, and improve. That is how our monthly execution retrospect works and progresses strongly. Coming to agility, the seventh discipline is perhaps the most important today than it has ever been. Strategy gives us direction, but circumstances keep changing. Customers change, markets change, technology changes, and assumptions become outdated. So, first we ask, what has changed? Then, what matters most now? And we reprioritize. We allocate time, resources, and ownership, and then recommit to new actions. Without agility, team continues executing yesterday's priorities extremely efficiently. Strategy gives direction, execution gives momentum, and agility keeps the movement going in the right direction. So, what are these 7 questions all about? Let's put them together: align, focus, act, share, account, learn, and adapt. And please remember, they are not 7 separate management initiatives. Think of them like an orchestra. 7 brilliant musicians don't automatically create great music. They need to play the same composition at the right time and in the same rhythm. They also need to listen to one another and adjust continuously. Break one link and execution weakens. Make the 7 flow together and small disciplined actions become to compound. Execution excellence is therefore one connected leadership rhythm that you see. Now, let me come back to the team I asked you to select at this very beginning. Look at these 7 disciplines and don't ask which ones you like most. Ask which one is weakest in your selected team. Perhaps everybody understands the goals, but weekly action is inconsistent, or actions happen, but there's little shared learning or accountability. Maybe everything works until conditions change, and then the organization is too slow to adapt. Don't try to transform all 7 at once. Find the weakest link, strengthen that discipline, and then measure what changes. I'll just quickly shift to the power of the digital compass because we need a system to drive accountability. So let me show you what I mean by making exclusion visible. Digital compass is designed as a simple platform where people record actions against agreed goals. This immediately connects everyday work with strategic priorities. Leaders get visibility into what is happening rather than waiting for somebody to prepare an update. Teams can see each other's progress and accountability becomes much easier to discuss. The intention is not to create another complicated software. The idea is simple. Simplicity plus visibility creates accountability, making execution visible, and it becomes much easier to manage and improve. Also, we must have complete transparency and real time collaboration. Now, imagine the same visibility operating across an entire team. You can see who is doing what against which goal and which focus areas. Actions are no longer isolated updates sitting in somebody's inboxes. Teams can see activity, shared ideas, recognize useful work, and collaborate around it. Just as importantly, every action can remain connected to what matters most. Leaders can recognize wins while they are happening and intervene when momentum becomes slowing. That is what transparency should do. It should improve behavior and culture, not simply increase reporting. Visibility only creates value when it helps people take better action. Also, we have real time scorecards and predictive insights, and that is where this idea becomes even more powerful. Instead of seeing individual actions, leader can see scorecards across individuals, teams, and organizations. They can identify goals that are on track, at risk, and behind. Predictive dashboards allow the conversation to happen before the final numbers even arrive. You can observe the daily habits and learning behaviors that are creating weekly impacts. This moves management from what happened towards what is likely to happen if we continue like this. And that creates the opportunity for earlier interventions. See it, understand it, and act on it. That is what real time execution visibility should enable. Once people are consistently recording actions and learning, something else becomes available: data. Not simply financial data, but data about how people are executing, which people and teams are acting consistently, which focus areas are receiving the most attention, and which appears to generate better outcomes. Where are our commitments repeatedly slipping, and where is collaboration strongest? We can then turn these patterns into actionable insights rather than relying only on impressions, which are based on perceptions. And importantly, the purpose isn't just feedback about the past, it is feed forward about what we should do differently next. Measure today, improve tomorrow, and increase the probability of achieving more. When people hear data driven culture, they often immediately think of customers, market, and financial analysts. But there's another powerful source of data: the behavior happening inside the organization. What do high performing people do differently? Which habits create better execution? And where are bottlenecks slowing performance? Behavioral data can help leaders identify patterns around performance, workload, and development. The organizational values better decisions, and the employee value what that things are fair and more focused support. Competitors may also be able to copy your production processes, but a deeply embedded culture of disciplined learning and execution is much harder to copy. That is why execution data can become a strategic advantage rather than simply another dashboard. Before we finish, I want you to score your organization privately. Give yourself a score from 1 to 5 on each of these 7 disciplines. 1 is weak, 3 is inconsistent, and 5 is world class. So, what's the next step? Now, if you have identified an execution gap, please don't go back tomorrow and try transforming the entire organization. Start with one business unit, one function, or one leadership team. Select critical goals where better execution would genuinely matter. Build the 7 discipline execution rhythm around these. Run it consistently for 90 days. Then measure what actually changes in behavior, accountability, and outcomes have you seen. If you would like us to help design and facilitate this journey and use Digital Compass to make the 90 days visible, we can explore that with you. So here's the simplest way I would recommend beginning. Choose one strategically important team, perhaps a struggling department or a leadership team reporting to the CEO. Select 3 critical business goals and build the 7 disciplines and the rhythm around them. Make execution visible and run the rhythm consistently for 90 days. Measure not only goals, achievements, but focused actions, accountability, collaboration, process improvement, learning, and business outcomes. Then you have something far more valuable than another workshop. You have evidence. If one important team could improve execution by 20% in 90 days, ask yourself what that would be worth to your organization. So start small, prove it, learn fast, and then we can scale it together. You now have 2 options. At this point, the choice is actually very simple: continue as you are or test a better way. Doing nothing may feel safe, but it quietly preserves the same execution gaps, delays, and wasted effort. And even if 20 to 30% of performance potential is being lost, that's a huge cost to your organization. The alternative is not a massive transformation. It is a 90-day pilot with one important team and 3 critical goals. For 90 days, you make priorities clearer, weekly actions more visible, and accountability more consistent. You create a rhythm where leaders can see problems early, teams can learn faster, and people know what really matters. Even a 20% improvement in execution discipline can create a very visible upswing in business outcomes. The pilot gives you something far more powerful than another idea. It gives you evidence for your own organization. So the real risk is not whether the pilot works perfectly. The real risk is allowing the current execution gap to continue unnoticed for another year. My invitation is simple: start small, prove the value in 90 days, and then let the results decide what to scale next. So let me leave you with one final thought. Strategy creates direction, but execution creates results. The real question is not whether your organization has good plans. It is whether these plans are visible in the actions people are taking every day, every week. If you can strengthen alignment, focus, action, learning, and accountability, even small improvements can compound into significant business impacts. So don't try to change everything at once. Identify the weakest link and start there. Choose one important team, one set of critical goals, and give yourself 90 days to prove what better execution can achieve. If today's conversation has made you think we need to improve this in our organization, I would be delighted to continue this discussion with you. My contact details are on the screen. Please feel free to connect with me after this. Thank you for your time, and I hope you leave with one question: what will be executed differently starting next week? Thank you so much.